Boris was an absolute bullshitter. We all know that. And Starmer really made hay. You know, we're going to serve you. You know, this is no more performative politics. Constantly sort of inferring and pretty much calling Boris a liar. I think he's done exactly the same thing, but he's probably a more effective liar.
If government wants growth, you can say, look, concentrate on two things. If you concentrate on infrastructure and housing, you will get growth. Infrastructure and housing will deliver you growth.
Rachel Reeves said, I don't have any plans to increase capital gains tax. She's proceeded to put capital gains tax up from 10% to 18. Totally gone against what she said she was going to do. Surely there should be some consequence. If you say something like that and it doesn't turn out to be true, it's not right. Welcome to the Progressive Property YouTube channel. So I've got a really exciting episode for you today. I've got John Collins with me, who was leader of Nottingham City Council, a unitary authority, for 16 consecutive years. And we're going to talk largely about what's happening with Labour, although he's not part of the sort of Labour hierarchy. He's not a councillor anymore. So, John, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so obviously, sort of cards on the table. Most of my listeners would know I'd be sort of certainly right of centre, but maybe a little bit more sort of right than others. So you know, we're probably not going to agree on everything here, but we should have a constructive debate.
Let's have a constructive debate for sure
on you know, sort of very relevant topics, mainly within the budget. So pre-election, we had a big campaign. Obviously, the Tories had upset lots of us, myself included, and I think Starmer sort of maybe played it safe. But he made quite a few promises, along with Rachel Reeves and some of his other shadow cabinet as well. The stuff I'd be bothered about would be planning, it would be taxation, and just sort of generally red tape around business. And what I did notice was sort of in the budget, and since, there's been a very big sort of about turn. So I suppose the first thing that I could sort of go into, or did you want to comment on that?
No, I mean, I probably wouldn't. This is probably going to be the point of first point of disagreement. I mean, election campaigns are always about selling the positive and minimising the negatives. And you know, were there absolute promises that were made that have then just been completely ditched? I probably would argue not. I always used to, and I know this is a terrible thing to admit, but I always used to say to people, there are different versions of the truth, and there's, you know, the truth is made up of a series of facts and points. You choose which to emphasise, you choose which not to emphasise, and I would say that you know, and you got to bear in mind as well, we're like 5 months into a Labour government after they've been out of power for 14 years. I kind of think it's a bit harsh to be coming to a conclusive judgment about where they're taking us yet. But I would say I've not personally seen anything that is, if you look at the manifesto, a downright contradiction of what was in the manifesto.
Okay, well, facts do matter, John. And
yeah, I know facts matter. I agree. I agree. Well, they matter to some. I'm not sure they matter to all politicians.
Well, I would definitely agree with you there. In fact, I'd probably hasten to say most. Okay, so in 2023, Stephen Reid, the Shadow Environment Secretary at the time, told a conference of the Country Land and Business Association that farmland would not be subject to inheritance tax. Now they've done exactly that. Reid, when asked whether Labour intended to get rid of the tax break, replied, "We don't," adding that we have no intention of changing APR. And then now they've done exactly that. So that is a fact, and surely facts matter.
I think people need to be very careful with the commitments they make when, before elections and, when they then get into office. And, there are semantics in this. So we have no intention. Actually, we did have no intention, but we've had to do it anyway. It's not a justification. And
no, it wasn't that. It was we don't. And,
it's got both in there, isn't it? Look. Yeah. I'm not justified. Don't expect me to justify it. Well, all I'm saying is politicians have an interesting relationship with the English language. Yeah. No, with the English language, yeah. And I think it's a little unfair, if I'm being honest, to pick out, say, Labour politicians when some of our esteemed senior parliamentary personalities, should we say, over the last 5 to 10 years have been very have found the truth rather difficult, and that's wrong too. Yeah. And I'm clear, people need to be truthful, and they need to, be careful about what they say in advance. Now, by all accounts, Stephen Reid actually didn't have very much say in whether that decision was taken or not. And if you're asking me, and I'm, 4 or 5 years away from my role as leader of the City Council and as an active Labour Party politician, but I think that, to me, is an example of it would be far better to sit down and have a bit of a conversation. I mean, bearing in mind it's not even going to be introduced until 2007. But you would have thought there is a way of achieving what the government wants to achieve, which is discouraging people using farmland as a commodity and as a way of avoiding inheritance tax. There must be a way of achieving that at the same time as allowing people who are going to work the land and land that is then gone down from generation to generation, allowing that to happen. And
there absolutely must be.
There must be.
And within a business, a business that is carrying on a trade is quite different in inheritance tax for inheritance tax purposes to one that is for purely investment. And obviously you can claim business property relief. Well, I surely a working farm that, is actually trading versus somebody who's bought a load of farmland, that has maybe just let it, leased it to a tenant farmer, or isn't working the land, hasn't got a trade. Surely there is a definition there. I couldn't understand that.
I mean, you've got Dyson, who's one of the biggest farmland owners in the country,
who does actually operate, and he has invested a lot as well.
But still, it's fundamentally it's not about generating income from farming. Fundamentally, it's having an asset which can be passed on without being subject to.
Well, how do you know? It's a bit like
because he said so, I think.
Well, no, I've looked for that quote and I can't find it.
Okay,
obviously, they're
enough.
Accusing Jeremy Clarkson of that now, the BBC have put it to him that it's a fact, but it isn't a fact. How do you know what somebody's intention was?
Well, you don't know. You don't know that. And one of the things I would say is, politics. Part of the challenge with politics is that it often descends into, personalities about this person said this and that person said that. It's right that politicians be held to account for commitments they give, but ultimately this is all about, it's about how we run the country, and it's about policy, and I suppose the starting point for me is, you look at the country, and we're in the position that we're in, but do things need to be fixed? Yes. do we need to raise money to fix some of those things? Yes.
Well, do we?
I think
or
we do,
should
yeah.
we not be thinking about how we're spending this money? The civil service has exploded since 2019. It's taken a lot of people through COVID. The government budget is now 1,300 billion. Surely the first thing that should happen is they should look at the cost base, and they should be working out, how many people they've got working in the civil service, how many quangos they're funding, how much is going into benefits and welfare, which successive governments, Tories included, don't really incapacity benefit, don't really look like they're particularly interested in reforming. What about all the money that they've borrowed a massive 2.8 trillion, and clearly they've got huge interest payments associated with that. Where's the plan for really getting that down over a medium term, some sort of sovereign wealth fund or something like that, so they're not subject to these massive interest payments? I just don't see any of it. All that seems to happen is, Starmer's come along, he's given huge, and I think you were sort of touching on the foundations, as he says, and the 22 billion plan black hole, which, by the way, 9 or 10 billion of is wage increases, public sector wage increases, the other 9 billion is just sort of fluctuation through the year, plus or minus. They knew about this. The OBR have published it all. This is in the context of 1,300 billion pound budget, and they've sort of created this 22 billion pound black hole, which, if you look at OBR and the IFS, pretty much said they knew about this. It's manufactured. It's nonsense.
I'm not sure they have actually, but anyway, go on.
Okay, and they're sort of trotting it out and using it because maybe it's something that the public, they feel the public can sort of latch onto and understand. You're right. There are more fundamental issues. There aren't enough young people being born. Not enough working age people to pay for the old people. We've got social care issues. NHS, yes, they keep piling more money in, but where's the reform? Where's there's layers and layers of middle management in all of these departments. Why have we not got the likes of Musk sort of saying, well, we're going to reform this, and we're going to some sort of department for they've got a department for value for money, but they don't seem to bloody do anything. I mean, why is it just spend more and kill growth and kill business all at the same time?
Well, okay, so
there's a lot in that. I know. I've thrown a lot at it.
That's not how I characterise it. So look, yes, there is some addition. So let's start with the 22 billion. So the reality is that is an in-year gap. Now, I used to, when I was on the council, we used to do the budget. We used to get a budget done. What was it? March, came in April, and then as we went through the year, you get quarterly report backs, and then first one was okay. The second one was, God, the roof's going to fall in because got massive overspend on this, and it's always the worst possible scenario. And then you did things. Maybe you had a recruitment freeze. Maybe you had some more stringent. I'm going to sign everything off on the part of the finance director.
Well, that's surely what I mean. You should be signing all the bloody invoices like I do. This is taxpayers' money.
It was a big council. we had a £1 billion a year budget. But anyway, the point I'm making is it's the normal thing that there will be a gap, but there were specific things that the government had not done and not accounted for. So, so for example, the compensation both for the post office, the post office debacle, the postmasters and mistresses,
I saw that.
and also the blood, the blood scandal, which has been running for ages and ages and ages. There was a report on infected blood and the levels of compensation.
How much money is all that then?
So that's about 16 billion.
Yeah.
On those two things. There has been some in terms of public sector pay, but if you're trying to sort things out and you're trying to make things
But train
work,
drivers, surely they should, if they give them more money, they should get something back.
Yeah, but
we don't need 3-day weeks in 4-day weeks in councils, and let's have the train drivers.
Well, the train drivers
stopping a train.
Train drivers aren't employed. They're not public sector workers.
But the wages are set by central government.
No, they're not. Well,
this was all part of the big argument.
They're not set by government. So
they control their wages. They were part of the unions behind. Sorry,
look. The union. If you want to have an argument about doctors and nurses, that's a different one. And yes, they did get decent pay increases.
Well, I think people are probably less bothered about that. Yeah.
Well, they are less bothered about that. Look, it was the rail companies that had to negotiate with the unions, and the bit where the government came in is the rail unions had to get sign off from government. For whatever they negotiated, because it impacted in terms of subsidy. So, in a sense, you're a bit right and I'm a bit right. But the point is, the rail companies had been wanting to settle that for a long time, and the proposals that were agreed between the companies and the rail unions. It was just the government had to sign them off.
Yeah.
Well, but we're getting into personalities.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just the RF, whatever it is. I mean, it was ASLEF and the R.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the acronym is now, but
the Labour Party's main funders, aren't they?
But they do get funding, but then they get funding from a whole range of other organisations. Just the Conservative Party gets funding from a whole load of people as well.
Yeah.
And frankly...
Unite the Union, 362 grand. GMB, 290. Union Shopford, Distributive...
How much
and
is that?
Allied Workers, USDAV, 213,000. And Unison, 158.
Yeah, but
what's that?
Hundreds of thousands.
Sweetie wrappers.
No, of course it's not. I mean, it's to help run a campaign, and the Labour Party, those unions will take a view that the Labour Party's policies are broadly supportive of where they want to go.
Yeah.
But you often hear the unions cracking on and criticising Labour ministers and the government as well. It's in this country, whether we like it or not, organisations and individuals are allowed within certain parameters to contribute to, to party funds.
Yeah.
And the Conservatives usually pull in far more money than the Labour Party. I don't think they did the last time round, but do I think this is the way that it should be done? No, not really. But then the alternative is you have state funding of political parties, and I kind of not sure the public could go with that either.
I'm not really necessarily advocating having state funding, and of course, I think giving giving donations. I think we've always done that, and maybe that's the best way forward. But so it's an indication of who's pulling the strings in the Labour Party, and when Labour have sort of what I think manufactured a £22 billion black hole, which largely could be explained through these public sector pay increases. Isn't it ironic that most of those pay increases have gone to the people who've given, or the organisations who have given the most money to the Labour Party? So just moving on, I suppose even more centrally in terms of the power base, back to facts.
Okay.
Radio 4 Today programme interview in March 2023, Rachel Reeves said, "I don't have any plans to increase capital gains tax. There are people who have built up their own businesses who maybe at retirement want to sell that business. They may not have had huge income through their life if they've invested in their business, but this is their retirement pot of money." And she's proceeded to put capital gains tax up from 10% to 18% if you're a lower rate taxpayer, and if you're a higher rate taxpayer from 20 to 24%.
Yeah, for the sale of shares,
Well,
but it's still only 10% if you sell your company.
Those are the headline rates for capital gains tax generally on any assets, but in addition to that, she has reduced BADR, which is business asset disposal relief, if you sell your business. So, she's totally gone against what she said she was going to do. It's not credible. I know with the previous example, he sort of said, oh, well, and I think you sort of inferred there that he didn't necessarily know what, Rachel and Starmer were going to do. She's the one making the policy. She's the one deciding what's going to happen. And, just over a year before the election, she's saying she's not doing that.
No. What she's saying is she's no plans to do it.
She didn't. Well, okay, she did say that, but then she's gone into quite a lot of detail explaining why, and she's totally gone against it. So, why is it okay for them to? Surely there should be some consequence if you say something like that and it doesn't turn out to be true. I could say that. I could sort of say, anything. Oh, I didn't have any intention to do that. I had no plans, John, but I totally about turn on some business deal or whatever after I've done it. It's not right. It's not, in our sort of model of fairness that tends to happen, Anglo-Saxon sort of set of values. I don't think this is right. And earlier on, you touched on Boris. I'm
agreeing.
Yeah.
I would agree with you on. And it's the same with the Andy Reid thing.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be very careful with what you say. Because like for example, Rachel Reeves in the last week has said that she, something along the lines of she's not planning on any further major tax increases in the next. However many budgets.
Yeah, she said it, and Starmer won't confirm it.
Yeah, so I think it's a foolish thing to say.
Yeah,
because you can't be sure about the future. But
they benefit from saying it. They sort of win an election through saying it potentially.
Yeah, but okay, so that's
less votes than Jeremy Corbyn, but they probably managed to win an election by telling porkies. Let's be honest.
No, I don't think that's true. But let's be. Blunt about this.
Yeah.
Was it the IFS who said right at the beginning of the election campaign, neither of the parties are being honest on tax?
That's true.
And part of the problem is, if you're honest on tax, you don't win an election.
Well, there is an argument there.
And that is a problem.
It is a problem.
Because it means you can't have an honest debate about it.
Yeah.
So you can't have an honest debate about the fact that, the national debt is massively increasing, and you can't have an honest conversation about the fact that at the same time as we're racking up debt, growth is ridiculously low and the health service is falling apart. You can't drive down the M1 and call it a motorway because half of it is 50 mile an hour. You can't get on a train and be pretty sure that it'll actually get to where it says it's going to get to at the time it says it's going to get to, because I don't have that experience very often. And one thing after another, it's the country isn't working anymore. It isn't functioning. And so the conversation is, so are we happy with that? Are we happy to continue doing that? And we'll pretend it's not happening. We'll take tax cuts. We'll continue to want a Rolls Royce for the price of a Mini. And then we'll just grumble and we'll kick the next government out because they said they can make all of that work and they can't. And at some point, the fundamental question is, do we want to try and resolve some of those issues, which is going to involve more money? And that's not to say you don't need efficiencies and you don't need to make sure the money is used well, because I think you absolutely do. And I think there are some major challenges around government of whatever party in achieving that. But there is a fundamental thing about, are we going to invest to make sure some of this stuff works in future, and invest to encourage growth, or are we just going to
we don't spend more tax money though to encourage growth? I mean, that is a fundamental misnomer as well.
No, I like it.
This is capital projects, but not just let's go and give some pay increases. I mean, that's what most of it is, just inflationary. It's not real growth.
Okay, so the Chancellor gave herself room for capital growth.
Yeah.
Okay, by redefining the rules.
I'm coming on to that. I mean, she said she wasn't going to fiddle the figures, and she's done exactly that.
Yeah, but
she's increased the debt ceiling again.
Yeah, but what? Why is that? So it's defining more clearly what certain types of debt are, and part of the. And I used to have this on the council. So. Local government accounting and government accounting is completely different to business accounting.
Yeah.
In business accounting, you take account of potential income streams, and you take account of assets. You don't do that in the same way in local government and in central government. And so those changes are to take into account known income flows, and yes. To create the opportunity, and
she's changed the rules.
Yeah, she has changed the rules. Yeah,
and exactly what she said she wasn't going to do.
Well,
you're right about. Okay, I take your point about the, the likes of it not being a level playing field. You're right about that, and I think there should be some sanction for saying things before an election that don't end up being true, because then you're going to force everybody to be more honest, and if there's some sort of sanction, then. It's a bit like in some of our industry, a business that we used to have. Everybody was lying. Everybody had to lie just to get business. VW, BMW, Land Rover, most of these companies had cheat devices on their diesel cars. They pretty much had to do it to meet the emissions, MPG, and to produce the car at the right price. And VW got caught. Maybe a couple of the others got caught as well. Maybe not in such a big way, but the fact is that pretty much all of them were doing it, and they had to do it just to remain competitive. But if it had been a level playing field and the rules had been such that they weren't able to do that, then they would probably still have sold as many cars, because one wouldn't have looked necessarily much better than the other. So I take that point, but. Boris was an absolute bullshitter. Yeah, we all know that. And Starmer really made hay. He pushed Partygate. He had his woman in there who did the Grey report. Who's now ended up working for him. I understand she's been sacked since. And all the way through, I think Rees-Mogg now calls him the preacher. The Reverend, because of all the preaching, that he was doing, which I think is quite apt, actually. He was, and I know you're not here to defend him, but I've just got to make this point. We're going to serve you. This is no more performative politics. Constantly sort of inferring and pretty much calling Boris a liar. I think he's done exactly the same thing, but he's probably a more effective liar, and I think he's a first division bullshitter rather than sort of Boris. I went to school with a lot of people like that. You sort of knew they were lying, and sort of all sort of part of it. I mean, there's more. There's Rachel Reeves. May 2023, we certainly won't be increasing income tax or national insurance if we win the election. Now, I know you'll probably say, it's employers, national insurance they've increased rather than employees, but where does it go? In this business...
That's in the manifesto. If you read the paragraph in the manifesto, it's pretty obvious that it's in the context
of
working people.
Working people. It's going to sit on their shoulders. In this business, our national insurance bill's gone up 110,000 quid. What was the first conversation that we had? How are we going to reduce that? In terms of headcount, it certainly will be a drag on wages. Tesco, I think that it's costing them something like 200 million per annum, about $1 billion over 5 years over the Parliament. They've already said it's going on food prices, and it's obviously going to reduce what they can pay to suppliers. So, there's no free lunch with this stuff. Working people, of which all of us are, that's who's going to pay for it.
But there's no free lunch on any of it. And it comes back to the thing about both the parties ruled out, increases in tax, income tax, national insurance, and VAT. Absolutely, that's the baseline. There's a baseline of there's a baseline of skewed policy making because there are certain things you can't say if you want to get elected, and that's a wider problem that I think we have.
There's a lack of honest debate.
There is a lack of honest debate, and I come back to the point about.
I mean, what is the fundamental problem? What is the issue? Why does the budget keep ballooning and we get less and less? What do you see as the?
The fundamental reasons, I think, are largely to do with lack of growth, and we've not had growth for a very long time.
So surely that's government, that's policy.
Yep.
Surely you encourage the private sector, which is where all the growth comes from, rather than piling more taxes on them, which will discourage growth. I mean, you can already see what's happened in the last month. We're probably going back into recession.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's true, and that's not.
The Purchasing Managers Index, which is empirical, that says that's what's happening.
And I've seen some of those indicators, but similarly, the OBR says, that there'll be enhanced growth next year, and then enhanced growth the year after, before it then levels out.
Because this is you're just spending sort of taxpayers' money to create short-term growth.
Well, you're spending. So there are a number of things in there, aren't there? So there's the increase in the minimum wage. There is some
7%.
Yeah. And I'll come on to that in a minute as well if you want. Government. There are certain things government does need to invest in because actually that will encourage growth.
Yeah.
So house building will encourage growth.
We're definitely coming on to that one, John, with your specialised knowledge. Yeah.
House building we definitely need to see a lot more of.
You're preaching to the converted.
Infrastructure. I mean, at the moment I work. I'm working up in Cumberland.
Yeah.
Hence, I gave the Cumberland example before. But so they're looking at a Devo deal with Westmoreland and Furness, which is the next door unitary, and they're looking at what do we want in this Devo deal? And the conversation I have is, well, you've got Sellafield, and you've got BAE Systems, you've got a number of other big employers. Then you've got the tourist industry in the Lake District. You've which attracts people to the area. Then you got farming. In reality, what's holding all of those businesses back is not they need handouts. They don't need handouts. Sellafield don't need handouts. BAE Systems building flipping submarines for the world.
Barrow.
Barrow. Yeah, they don't need them. They don't need it. What they need is the railway line that goes at 2 miles an hour and falls off the cliff every time there's a storm. They need that.
50s rolling stock, 60s rolling stock.
They need a proper railway line connecting all the way out and down that coast, so that you can get the materials into and out of Sellafield.
Yeah.
So you can get the materials into and out of from Workington Port, which also needs investment, in and out of Barrow. You need workforce mobility up and down the line, because at the moment what happens is, they compete. The two big industries compete for workforce. A couple of quid extras paid at Sellafield, so they all go to Sellafield. Then Barrow pays 3 or 4 quid more down there, and then they all go back down there. You need to have the roads are terrible. The broadband hardly works at all, and even though in one of the few areas of the country where they'd actually be quite happy to have another nuclear power station, you can't put a nuclear power station because there's no grid network, and there's no grid connectivity. Now, if the government wants growth, put a railway line in, pay for the road improvements, improve the broadband, and get that connectivity, and then you don't need to then be worrying about that area, because it will grow. You will see exponential growth. You will see good, steady growth, which will add to the national, the national growth target. But you'll also see strategically, it's providing energy. It will fulfil that function of being energy coast. You'll have You'll have growing number of jobs there. They'll need to generate housing as well. You'll have entrepreneurs who want to live. The kind of people who are work to live. People who want to be in the Lake District because they want all of that experience. They want the mountains, the water, the canoeing, the biking, all of that kind of stuff. Attracted to the area. If the broadband's good enough, they can do their own businesses, they can set up their own industry. If people can get around, you can expand the tourist industry onto the coast rather than it being confined within around Keswick and Windward. The point I'm making is, and that's just in Cumbria, if you got that up and down the country, as I think you have, you can really, if government wants growth, you can say, look, concentrate on two things. If you concentrate on infrastructure and housing,
communications,
you will get growth. Infrastructure and housing will deliver you growth. You also need to have a fundamental review about how do you make sure that what you're funding is good enough, not gold-plated, does the job, but doesn't doesn't overspend, doesn't end up costing you far more than you need to, and far more than comparators with other countries. And then you've got the planning system as well, but no doubt you'll mention that.
Let's come on to that, because I mean that is your specialism now, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you help developers, businesses to navigate the planning process, which
try to understand the planning process.
Let's be honest,
how councils deal with it. Yeah,
let's be honest, requires a lot of navigating and a lot of sort of understanding. The current, I became politically conscious maybe in the 90s, and I remember Tony Blair and Gordon Brown sort of saying, Brown especially, we're going to get, everybody building, and there's going to be a lot more housing delivery. Didn't really happen. It probably, it maybe got to just below 200,000, something like that, units delivered per annum. Then we're into David Cameron, George Osborne, similar story. Not a lot happened. Okay, they had Help to Buy and a couple of other schemes, but the numbers, stayed broadly between, say, 160, 190. The target was 300,000 per annum. You had the same with Theresa May. Boris said he was going to build back better. And then you'd got Liz Truss saying something similar. Didn't get very long to implement. And now you've got Starmer saying he's going to develop or he is going to help deliver 1.5 billion houses over the course of the Parliament, which, that's 300,000 a year.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Now, if you sort of break this back, they said they were going to do this on day one. Now, obviously, we've got the realities of the NPPF, which is going through a consultation. Yes, it takes time, but I think it was pretty unrealistic what they said, was going to happen in terms of day one, all of these changes within the council. Was it a planning super squad, 300 new officers? How many councils are there? Roughly 300.
About 300, yeah.
So that's one per council. It's not even a drop in the ocean. So, even if today they amend the NPPF and resource the councils properly and do all the other all the other things in this nonsensical planning system that we have, I think we all agree with that. You're definitely 2 years or 3 years just to bring a site forward. So actually you'll only see any growth probably in the last 2 years of the Parliament. And therefore, if you've carried on at the, let's say, 200,000 a year for the first 3 years, that's 600,000. To deliver the remaining 900,000, you've got 2 years to do it. So, what are you there? 450,000 a year in the final 2 years. How is any of that believable?
So, I think it's an ambitious target, and
which has benefits.
Yeah. So the things they have done, first of all, they've reinstated. The existing system was going nowhere once the targets once the housing targets were abolished.
Yeah.
Labour
That's right.
Labour
That's-
has reintroduced those, and I think
you're
that's
right about
that's
that.
a positive.
Yes, it is it's a major positive. When they removed those, the Tories, I just stood in the office and it's just beggars belief. What is this about?
Well,
yeah,
it was about appeasing backbenchers and
Yeah.
trying to pretend black
Yeah.
was white. So
Amersham by-election.
yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing, there's another 500 million which has been put into the social housing fund, which is supporting social housing. Yeah, social housing providers.
RPs.
Actually up in the number of properties that they're building. And then the third thing that the government's done is that in the budget they allowed councils to keep all their housing receipts. So right to buy receipts. I mean, they've also.
Is it ring fenced or is that just going into the black hole?
No, it'll be ring fenced for housing.
Okay, good.
Because those capital receipts. So the deal was beforehand, you could keep the capital receipts as long as you put some of your own money in.
Yeah.
And and that was the way that you funded your own social houses. This time, you get to keep all the receipts. And so you can afford to build social housing even if you haven't got anything to match against it. If you don't use it, I'm sure the government will take it back, because that's what the government. They've not changed the system substantially. Okay. If councils didn't use their right to buy receipts, then government clawed them back and then reallocated them.
Okay.
So I think those are steps in the right direction. It doesn't change the fundamental of you've got to find a way of freeing up the planning system, making it more bureaucratic and better resourced. The problem with local government finance is that for the biggest council, so all unitary councils have got adults and children's services. So in Nottingham, that was 70 to 75% of the budget was spent on adult and children's services. And the growth in those areas is just exponential. And you don't get extra money.
Why is that?
Well,
because this is part of the problem that we were talking about earlier.
Well, demographically,
it's not just a lack of growth; it's all this stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So you got demographically, you've got an older population.
Yeah.
In terms of children, I mean, part of the problem there is, if I'm being honest, I think that the challenges in child protection they grow because people know more about them, as opposed to there's more of them.
Yeah.
You find out more.
Must be.
People know more. Stuff that used to happen in the past that nobody knew about is now more obvious.
So it costs more because you've got to resource it.
Yeah, and and at the same time, so you also have some other issues around this. So both older people and children in care, they're not directly provided for by the council because they haven't got their own children's homes, they haven't got their own older people's homes anymore. You pay for it in the private sector.
Yeah.
And while there's probably capacity in terms of older people, there absolutely isn't in terms of children, and particularly the most difficult children to manage. And as a result, councils are over a barrel, and they have the law says they have to pay, and the companies who are providing are charging a fortune. And
so why don't the council
Nottingham,
have their own houses?
Because they haven't got the capital, and they
can borrow from the Public Works Loan Board. They can. They've got. They can get money from central. I mean, they use the Towns and Cities Fund. I don't know if it can be used for that, but they have bought some buildings with that, which they're developing. They have got access to capital if they really, really look.
And they got a lot of capital is earmarked and is required for certain things, and it's just very difficult. It's very difficult having those. And see, the other side of it is when councils did used to run their own children's homes, That's when they used to find that they had problems with the people who were looking after children, and
because they couldn't do it properly.
Because they couldn't do it properly.
Yeah,
and
that's often what happens.
Yeah.
With,
and so
let's be honest, the public sector versus having the private sector with a profit motive.
Yeah, and there needs to be a model which is a different model. But at the moment, you look at Nottingham City Council, had well recorded financial problems. When you look at, they just taking last year's
that was after your tenure, wasn't it?
It was. Although I get some of the blame for it. But,
do you?
But
you can't be responsible forever, John. I mean,
I'd like to think not, but yeah, it doesn't feel like it sometimes. But so year before last, so they had a budget. They set the budget in March. £260 million budget, £260 million budget, get to next September. The finance director who recommended the budget said the budget's fine, £260 million net budget, is then telling everybody that that there's a £62 million overspend on a £260 million budget, which they then managed down to, by using reserves and stuff, down to about £20 million, and then effectively declare themselves bankrupt. So but when you look at it, that overspend was almost all in adults and children. Well, it was in three areas: adult services, children's services was the biggest bit, and then homelessness services. All of which you've got an absolute legal responsibility, statutory responsibility to do stuff, and you just haven't. And so therefore, it's demand led. You haven't got the money to. The council hasn't got the money to pay for it, because they're not allowed to put the council tax up by more than a particular percentage. Government grant has been massively cut back over the last 10 to 15 years, and the figures don't add up. And so, although Nottingham ended up in the position that it was in, most other big unitary authorities are not far off. And, and so you have those pressures as well. And everywhere you look in the public sector, and everywhere you look in terms of wanting things to work, it's not working. And
this is why we need smaller. We need smaller government, more private sector.
Well, I think that
actually pays for it all and creates growth. I mean, that's surely got to be the target.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I think we need other things as well.
Yeah.
But I do think we need less central government. So there are some things I think central government absolutely gets wrong. So first of all, there should be more devolution. So I'm in favour of metro mayors, but actually I'm in favour of a proper system of unitary authorities.
Why would you not do that? We were discussing this before, and this whole layers of district, and you've got local parish councils, and then you've got unitary authorities, and
because it's reorganising loads of different politicians at different levels of the organisation, and it's just a bit difficult.
Yeah,
but it needs to be done.
Yeah,
and government needs to look to devolve responsibilities down to local government. That doesn't happen because civil servants think that local government's run by a bunch of yokels who can't do anything. And which, frankly, is largely not the case. But so that leads to something else, which is local government does something, and then central government decides it's got to check to see whether local government's done it properly, and then somebody else, the audit, whatever it is, checks that, and there's so much checking, and that's where you've got a lot of bureaucracy. The other thing in government is there's this tendency to, and this is about insulating ministers from decisions. So if you want something practical done, a government department doesn't do it anymore. What it does is it outsources it to an agency. Because once you've outsourced it to an agency, you can have a chief exec, and you can even have a board, and that's right the way through the health service. And so if something goes wrong,
you blame it on them.
You sack them.
Yeah.
You don't have to, the minister can say, I was told this person's going. I'm holding them to account.
Yeah.
Whereas the whole point about being a politician is, you're a talented amateur and you need to be accountable. And the whole job is, you're not there because you know how to run things, because you don't, because you're not professional. The professional, you've got professional management to manage professionally. Effectively, what you are as a politician is the chair of the board and the board member, non-execs.
The interface.
Yeah, you're the interface.
Yeah.
But if something goes wrong, you've been elected by the electorate, and you're accountable for strategy and implementation. And if that goes wrong, that's what you're there for. You're there to go, you know what, hands up, it hasn't worked out, I've done my best, they've done their best, but actually we're going.
I agree with you. I mean,
that's the job of a politician. The job of a politician is not to hang on by their fingertips and blame everybody else as a desperate attempt to keep their job. It's just... it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it's about.
And you know, from my point of view as a developer, and I'm sure you have similar challenges with what you do, you know, you'll look at most secretaries of state over the last, or I'm thinking specifically housing, communities and local government. How many of those did we have, you know, in the last, say, 15 years? I mean, it could be something like 15, over 15. How can any of those set policy, follow it through? You know, A, B, how can they know anything about it? When you talk to them about it, they clearly have very little knowledge, and I don't think that's acceptable either.
No, the point at which
this notion of bringing somebody in who's the interface, who's you know responsible to the electorate, but then doesn't have any technical knowledge, doesn't have any sort of professional experience or anything like that. Surely that's not acceptable either. I mean, why are they not sort of employing better people who can...
What, as ministers?
Yeah.
So you have this you have this thing about effectively in government, it's this almost the celebration of amateurishness. You know, your politicians, your MPs, they're put into positions. Often they're put into positions specifically because they don't know anything about it, and they're supposed to learn and support the civil servants. But it perpetuates a lack of challenge. And then people are there for relatively short periods of time, so they don't even have time to find out what their brief is about. And ultimately, you know, government should. You've got to be careful that you don't have people who confuse the role of the chief executive with the role of the chairman of the board, and they've got to understand that their role is to be accountable and to hold people to account and to ask the stupid questions and to represent the public. Their job is not to do the job of the senior civil servant, and you've got to get that
they're
right.
the chairman rather than the operational sort of chief executive.
Yeah, but even being chair of the board or a non-exec director, you've got to know what you're talking about.
Of course you do.
You've got to
You don't
understand.
get appointed to the board unless you know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. So it's getting that balance right, and I just think Parliament. I mean, you know, we were talking about Rory Stewart's book earlier, but you know, you read that book and you read the book of other parliamentarians, and you just get that sense of this is amateur hour, and you know, there is almost no emphasis placed on skill and experience and knowledge as the basis for becoming a minister. It's almost irrelevant.
It's completely nuts.
And you wouldn't do it in any other You wouldn't do it in any other walk of life.
You wouldn't. And you know, I was only listening to a book that's just come out. It's called Out: How Brexit Got Done and the Tories Were Undone. And I listen to it, you know, late at night when I'm not sleeping. There's a lot of civil servants that have provided sort of quotes and information because they were there at these meetings. And there's a comment from one at a meeting with Liz Truss talking about when Putin invaded, and you know, Truss had got to decide what the energy cap was going to be and how much the government was going to put in, and allegedly the cap was either 2,500 or 3,000, and within the space of a few seconds, she decided that it should be £2,500, the cap that everybody pays on their energy bills every year, rather than 3,000 for an average home. I think the comment was "go big or go home," and the difference between those two was 10 billion. And you know, what will she have known about, you know, the background to that decision, the depth? All right, I don't know what she read exactly, but the suspicion is that, these are very, very decisions that are very, very important, that are made in a very superficial way with a lack of understanding. I mean, there are smart people in the Treasury. There are some really smart civil servants giving advice, but you just wonder who they're giving the advice to.
Well, you can give advice; it's not always taken, and sometimes there are other reasons. It's the same in councils. You can be given advice, and that doesn't necessarily mean you take the advice. You've got to take account of the advice, and you've got to properly process it. And you should be able to if you're not taking advice, you should be able to articulate why that is the case. And again, it's just my experience on the council, and people will say, "Oh, yeah, he says that now." But so I was at a general rule, which is, if I couldn't explain a decision, then we shouldn't take the decision. If I couldn't stand up in front of people and say we're doing this for this reason, then we shouldn't be doing it. And I think there needs to be more of that, and that openness and accountability and reasoning behind major serious decisions. People need to justify what they're doing, and I don't think we get. I think the nature of our politics infantilizes
24-hour news cycle.
Yeah. It's just like, and
Boris was a professional at this. I think he was. What are all the polls saying? Well, what's the news saying? Oh, we better it's a shopping trolley. Well, we'll about turn them because the public don't like it.
And this was, again, we had that quick comment or quick few words about populism, but populism is trying to apply soundbite solutions to complex problems.
Yeah.
And we're ill-served by it. But it's a reflection of the fact that a lot of people's engagement with politics is almost non-existent. And if they see a problem, they think somebody should be able to come up with a simple solution to it. And so there's always that sense of, well, who's got the simple solutions? And, people's attention span isn't sufficient to be able to say, okay, well, look, let me just take you through this. This is why it's not, this is why we are where we are. Yeah. And how do you think we then need to work on the solutions? And
£22 billion black hole.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whether it's there or not, it's a soundbite, and it's there to grab people's attention.
Yeah.
And sometimes, sometimes those kind of soundbites just drag people's attention from what it should really be focused on.
Yeah.
And that's your challenge.
Yeah, it's a fair point. So right back to 2015, 16. We've had this sort of perennial problems in our business and our industry around Section 24, which is, this was George Osborne. I think it was somebody at the Treasury dreamt up the idea that landlords are not able to, or shouldn't be able to, offset all the mortgage interest against the rent. So you're in a business, it's quite normal for all of the costs of doing business to be offsettable against the income you receive, and what's left is your profit, and you're taxed on your profit. Section 24 basically says if you're a landlord of a reasonable size and you own the properties personally, you can only really offset about half of your mortgage interest costs, which are often the biggest cost. So you've got a situation where lots of landlords are now paying more in income tax than they're actually receiving in net profit or net rent after their costs, which to me doesn't make any sense. Most of us agreed. I don't know if you are in agreement here, but we need a well-functioning private rented sector. It helps with labour mobility, flexibility, growth, employment, all sorts of stuff. Yes, it's important we have people buying, first-time buyers. At the root of this, what they've done is push out a load of small landlords, or certainly reduce the numbers coming in. And in more recent times, I think there's a net reduction, quite a serious net reduction in the amount of properties in the private rented sector. So, of course, I studied economics, supply and demand. We're in a market economy. supply and demand dictates that we've got less supply, therefore price must increase. And of course, there's been layers of regulation, all the rest of it. So, you've gone from a situation here, a little 3-bed house, 2016, that we would rent out. We rent a lot of these little ex-council houses, $550 a month. That property is now $1,050. In fact, 2019, it was probably $750, something like that. So it's gone from $750 to $1,050 just since 2019. Now, okay, some of it is interest rate rises, less people buying because of that, and lots of it is extra regulation, but most of it, I think, is increased stamp duty and Section 24. So when you listen to the politicians, and of course this was the Conservatives that introduced this, but Labour are now exacerbating it by increasing stamp duty further. They sort of use the, don't quite say it, but it's the nasty landlord, we're going to get them, this is politically popular, we'll repeal the Section 21, which means you can't evict tenants for, you need a specific guideline, specific reasons why you're going to evict someone. No landlord wants to evict somebody for, or the vast majority, I'd say 98%, 99% of our evictions are just because of the non-payment of rent. But of course, we can't use that mechanism, the Section 8, every time because it's not efficient. So we'll revert to the Section 21. So all of this stuff just pushes rents up, just pushes up the cost of doing business and makes it worse for the tenants. So do politicians actually care about the tenants, or are they just saying it to be politically popular? Because, as a landlord, it just looks like, well, I know the tenants are paying the price.
Yeah, tenants are paying. There's not enough rented accommodation, and there's not enough social rent, there's not enough market rent, there's not enough, intermediate, the stuff with a little bit of subsidy just to help people. There's not a ladder that people can get on.
All true. So why exacerbate it with these policies?
So,
local councils, they haven't got enough stock. They've got major homelessness issues, housing lists, all the rest of it.
I know.
Why does central government do this then?
Well,
you must know some of them. I don't get it.
I think the Conservatives introduced it because they saw it as effectively a massive subsidy.
Want to raise tax,
and at the time,
and the tenants can pay for it,
and an easy way of getting tax,
and the tenants can pay for it.
Part of the challenge is, and if you take away all the, what goes on behind the scenes, you look at the private rented sector. Where you need to get to is consistent quality and a degree of consistency in the way that the way tenants are treated.
Institutional investment, is this?
I think institutional investment is important,
which actually he's encouraged, and we've utilised some of that.
I think that is important because, part of the problem with the rented sector has been, and I agree with you. I've met loads of really good landlords, but equally, there is a strata of landlord that we in Nottingham we introduced licensing.
They've done it here.
Yeah,
which is actually for good landlords, it's a great.
Yeah,
but £900 every, and with councillors admitting, there's no way they'll get rid of this because it is a major profit centre, and they've published. The company providing the service is taking something like 1.5 million out of it, and the council are making that much profit as well.
So the council, in Nottingham, the money can't be spent on anything other than those regulatory services, and the fee is set accordingly.
Yeah,
but people sort of say, "How isn't this a hammer to
another
crack a nut?
tax?"
And isn't it another tax? And the challenge was that actually when it was introduced and we inspected private rented sector housing, over 65% of the houses that were inspected had defects. And we're not talking about energy certificates and things like
Yeah.
that. We're talking about not
safe.
They're not safe. Yeah, we had.
But they need remediating.
Yeah, no, I know.
And
but
that's right.
absolutely, and so the system has actually improved the quality of the stock.
Fine.
There are still
so
some,
remove it from the areas where you don't need it anymore.
Yeah, and there are
which is not what's happening everywhere. Yeah.
Well, I wonder whether there should be a national system which is
Well, they're doing it, aren't they? They keep talking about it.
well, and I think
Gove was going to do it.
I think a consistent national system with properly regulated fees and clear standards,
And not for profit.
and definitely not for profit, is an important backstop. I think the other thing
The
is
tenants pay this profit.
yeah, I know they do.
The tenants pay it all.
I know that.
This is. But
I appreciate it. But tenants do have to. But ultimately, yeah, over a period of time, they're paying. What was it? I think in Nottingham, it's about. I don't know. It's about £500 for 3 years or something.
But the issue, and you're not here to defend any of this, but it is for a defined period. There is a national framework that the government, the central government made them meet these, and it's a 5-year period. And if you take a license out at year 2, it actually only lasts another 3 years.
Yes, yeah, I know.
If you take it out at year 4.5, it lasts 6 months, and it's 900.
And that doesn't make sense to me. And also the loopholes that councils have to go through, and it's not universal, and it plays off one area against another, and it's
tough
it's
to
one of
introduce
those.
them. I think I watched it.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those things where you'd be better off just having a national standard implemented nationally with regulated fees, and then you've got a backstop, and that does help good landlords because actually. It means the Rackmans. Honestly, there are some terrible people out there.
You think they're still knocking about the Rackmans? I mean, around here, it's a smaller town, isn't it? You're talking about Nottingham, but I just can't really think that there's many left. You think there's still?
Well, I still, even now, because I still know some of the people in enforcement, some of the stories that come back. I mean, like a family being rented a basement with no windows.
Well,
you have.
Stuff like that is
a house where people were getting in and out of the window because the door was blocked up.
Stuff like that is, but the legislation's already there to deal with it all. Why charge all the good landlords?
I know, but some of that enforcement, the
money needs to go into enforcement.
Actually pays for the enforcement. Otherwise, there's nobody to do it because it's. In the context of where I was talking about adult and children's services and where all the other things that money is spent on, there's nobody. We go back to planning. Yeah. There isn't enough money I was part of the reason for explaining about local government finances. That's the reason why there aren't enough planning officers. Yeah. Because the money is, in a way, it's a discretionary service.
Diverted.
So it's diverted.
Why not ring fence it? Ring fence it. Say this is important for our growth, national growth.
And I think that would be...
And you ring fence this money, and actually, instead of it taking 2 years, and you must have this continually with the work that you do and your applications, a developer can pay double to have it done in half the time and triple to have it done in a third of the time.
I wouldn't be at all surprised if what the government ended up doing was allowing an increase in fees, but a requirement to ring fence it, because it's the only way that you're going to get the planning service properly staffed. And fundamentally, most of the problem that developers now have with planning is. They can't get hold of anybody.
No, that's the issue I have when I put an application in.
Building regs as well. Yeah. There's hardly anybody in building regs, and then there's...
Thankfully, we can use approved inspectors that are not... But if we're doing tall buildings, got to go to this gateway now, and there's a major problem there all brewing. Yeah,
because they're not
sending it back.
No, there's not the resources, and the people who are running it... haven't got the resources, and they don't even understand the legislation. So, let's hope that's teething problems.
I do sincerely hope that. Yeah.
Fundamentally, in planning, it needs to be properly resourced, and it needs to be ring fencing councils. But also, the whole system just needs to be simplified. And then
permitted development in the US, you have an area that's zoned, and you have maybe 20 house types. If you build this, and it's almost like building regs, it's really prescriptive, then it's pretty much granted, and it's just done in a very simple process. Why can we not?
You've got to,
for volume house building, surely.
Yeah. No, and if the national imperative is infrastructure and housing, then you've got local democracy is great, but we've all voted in a national election, and if the government is saying, you know what, it's infrastructure and growth, and that means, sorry guys, but we're going to have to constrain your local ability to say no just because you don't want it in your backyard. Well, that's the way it's got to be, and I think government's got to be brave on it. And I hope they will be, because otherwise they'll get nowhere near 300,000 a year. I think they've done some good things to start with. I think the big thing's going to be is going to be a root and branch look at planning, and you can't get away from the fact that if you're going to encourage more house building, you're going to have to get rid of some of the regulation, and you're going to have to reduce local discretion. You're going to have to do things that people
what have they
people don't want.
started, which gives us an idea that they're going to do any of that? And how can we say that they're resourcing local councils with 300 officers, which is on average one per council? Where is the evidence that they're doing any of this?
Well, like setting targets again for a start is actually requiring councils to focus on actually delivering housing, what they should do. And having that in the local plan. What they then need to follow it up with is a much quicker local plan policy process, because it's 3 years to do a local plan, and it's ridiculous, and it needs to be done more rapidly. But also a sense of jeopardy for councils that if they're obstructing consequences. Yeah. If they're not doing the local plan properly, and they're not taking account of the numbers, then actually that gives developers the opportunity to get in and to develop and to do stuff.
Judicial review or lose funding.
There needs to be ways in which that can be enforced.
Yeah,
I agree with you about, there are developers who would be more than happy to pay extra to have a fast track through the planning system.
A lot of them would have to do it. In terms
and it
of,
would make sense.
It's probably quite a small cost versus them sitting there with men not being productive, land not being productive, paying interest. I had a consent on a site. I don't know, this is probably 2.5 years ago. It was consented. I had my men there trying to make a start, and I couldn't get the conditions off, the pre-commencement conditions, for 6 months. And I couldn't get any response. And all right, it was COVID, but this is still going on now, and this is all part of the same stuff.
And it's not just planning. It's property as well. So if the council's selling property, it can take forever, and and then you've got the legals to go through, and council legals. They've got 101 other things to do. Slow down the list of priorities and so on and so forth. And a system whereby developers have the opportunity to say, you know what, I don't mind it, or give them the option. If you want to pay a bit more, maybe we can do it more quickly. Maybe it can be outsourced. Maybe we can buy an additional expertise. But the service itself, you can change the law, unless you've got the staff to implement it, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Unless you've got the framework, unless you're going to change the framework, you've just got to speed up the timetables. In terms of strategic plans, in terms of planning committees. You're going to have to restrict the discretion of planning committees so that there's far more presumptions in favour of, and that way potentially you can make a difference. But it's getting stuck into the detail and understanding where the blockages are in the system, and that's what the work of government is. So you're saying, where's the evidence they're doing it? And I would say, well, 5 months in, where's the evidence they're not doing it? And they've done a few things in the small steps in the right direction, but the proof of the pudding's in the eating.
You would hope.
You'd also hope that there'd be, and this is something the government can do. It can better staff up the planning inspectorate so that appeals don't take 9 months. They take 3 months.
Yeah. Consequence. Permitted development regime, if it's not determined within, I think, 55 days, deemed granted. Now, all right, maybe that's a little bit much for a planning application, because but my God, my Lord, it would certainly push them into actually doing something rather than just ignoring you for
absolutely. And and what about kind of the national strategic planning applications that are done? I mean, that's a 3-year process. The amount of paperwork that you have to do,
reports, consultees,
consult everybody. Report on newts and flowers. I mean, it's just,
bionet diversity. I mean, this has gone nuts.
We either want infrastructure or we don't. And if it takes, again, I mean, going back to what I'm doing up in Cumberland, but it will take 2 years to get a development order to start digging boreholes to see whether the geology is right for constructing what's called a geological disposal facility for long-term nuclear waste. But it'll take 3 years to allow you to do
just to drill
the exploration. Never mind the flipping project. The project itself is a 20-year project, but 10 years of that is working it up and
reports.
And it'll be 5 years to get through planning. Well, and the next time you want a nuclear power station, it's going to be another 3 years to 5 years to get through.
Which is a major issue. We have the most expensive electricity in Western Europe. I mean, look at the US. They've been fracking. They've got energy that's not even a quarter of the cost of ours. I mean, this has got to inhibit growth. It's got to.
Absolutely. But again, why is it that the price of electricity is set against the most expensive way of generating it, which is gas?
I don't know. They were supposed to unpick this. Rishi said he was unpicking it, and nothing happened.
£300 a kilowatt hour. For gas. Nuclear is 120. Wind is now 60 to 70, and yet. We have to, the consumer, pay wind generators whose costs are 40 to 50.
The same.
£300 a kilowatt hour.
It's completely nuts.
And then the government claws it back off those generators.
It needs unpicking.
It's the whole thing.
Well,
is
they probably don't want to stop it because they're clawing it back.
The whole thing is bonkers. And yet
a lot of this was Blair, though. Feed-in tariff and. The sentiment was right, but the way that this was all constructed, you need to start again.
Tariff. Nobody pays feed-in. Nobody gets a feed-in tariff or hardly anything these days.
Not new connections, but there are loads of existing ones that it was 20 years. Renewable heat incentive.
So ultimately, that's for government to sort out. But I don't think the green stuff around energy production is anywhere near as significant as the gerrymandering of the market, effectively. Because the market, why is it? Where is the incentive for people to produce cheap electricity in whatever form, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, where's barrage? Where is the incentive when ultimately it's all charged at £300 a kilowatt hour, which is the most expensive? You might as well build another gas-fired flipping power station. The whole thing is just mad. And if the market means anything, surely it should mean that me as an electricity purchaser can go to a solar person and can say, I'll have your electricity, thanks very much, or I'll have your electricity for wind turbine. And then they'll say, yeah, but you have to pay a bit of the nuclear bit as well, because otherwise, when the wind isn't blowing, we'll turn you off.
You need baseload. To produce this energy. When the wind doesn't blow, the sun doesn't shine, this stuff doesn't work.
And maybe the baseload is what you're paying through your standing order or whatever. But the notion that we have no agency in the energy market, which allows us to choose people who produce energy cheaply, but we have to buy it off we all have to pay the same and pay for it at the most expensive rate, is completely, utterly mad. And
so why are they not dealing with that?
Because they've been in for 4 months and maybe they'll get around to it. I don't know. But it's on some of those big, ultimately,
because that is inhibiting growth, industry.
Of course it is.
Production.
As is the fact that if you want to put a factory somewhere, then you've got to get the electricity connection in, and the people who put the electricity connection usually give you 2, 3, 4 year wait time.
That's a racket as well. I mean,
it's a fortune.
When we get a development done, all the non-contestable works that the UKPN or whoever demand, it is unbelievable. We put a roller shutter door in on a development. I think they charged us 12,000 quid. My team showed me where they bought it from, the producer, and it was £2,000 worth of roller shutter door that these guys had added 10 grand onto. And it was the same thing with the substation and all the time. And this just continues. There's never a discussion.
Yeah.
It just seems...
BT and broadband.
Yeah.
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 Because Openreach have got a monopoly on putting the fibre in. If you actually want fast broadband, then you have to pay for all the fibre.
Yeah.
You don't. That's not their cost. It's your cost before you even get the opportunity to pay whatever cost they're then going to put on top of that for the actual cost of your broadband. We seem to have allowed. On the one hand, we're supposed to take a view about how markets work, and on the other, we seem to allow people to get away without any competition at all, and
especially in utilities.
I'm sure it's not just this country, but the mentality just seems to be you do what you can get away with, and you charge whatever you can.
Yeah.
Whether it's dare I say, airlines, whether it's train companies, whether it's
those two aren't
tickets.
profitable though in the long run. I mean, trains are never, if you take the whole network, they're never really profitable. Hence, you need government subsidy.
Yeah, you do
and
need
the same with
subsidy.
Airlines. Warren Buffett always says, if you take it over a 10, 15, 20-year period, very bad investment. On average, none of them make any money. So, I don't know, maybe there's a good reason with those two, but...
But as a consumer, there's often no transparency about how the prices. So I was looking at prices to go to, because my wife's Finnish. I was looking at prices to go to Finland. So in the summer it'll be £120. If I go in January, it's going to be 19 quid. Okay.
School holidays.
I know, but it's just you get that sense of people do what they get away with, and I just think part of the problem that we have as a country is it's almost a mentality thing. And it also comes back to us because none of us like paying any extra tax, but we all want the best possible services. None of us, think that the way that we are personally treated is fair, but we're happy to think about somebody else paying a little bit more. And I think that's part of our challenge. And do I think a Labour government is going to be able to change all of this? I think it's going to have to up its game. I mean, to be honest, and I think at the moment, what you hope is that there's a bit of patience because there's a lot to sort out. If there's not that patience, then we'll in 4 or 5 years' time we'll have another government, probably be a populist government of some description, and we'll all spin around again and see what happens. But there are challenges and they're deep seated and they need resolving, and they need resolving seriously. And none of it's going to be short term.
We need doers. We need people who are actually going to get on and not propagate this sort of performative politics and populism, as you call it, who are going to actually pull the levers and do the grind and actually deliver. So, John, it's been really interesting sort of chewing the fat with you. What could you just explain to the audience what you do in a little bit more detail? I sort of gave a basic understanding, but I'm not sure it was entirely accurate. So what do you do now?
Well, what I do is there's kind of two sides to it. One is I look at the properties that become available. I look at them in the context of how they'll be viewed in planning terms, and offer advice to people who are looking to either buy or are looking to secure planning. So there's that at one level. Certainly in Nottingham, the council owns a lot of land, and that becomes available for sale. I've got quite a lot of experience around that land, what the constraints are, what the potential uses might be, what's likely to be favoured, what isn't likely to be favoured, and that's useful information if people are looking to bid and are looking to purchase. And then there's that, there's the straightforward advice around planning stuff, and obviously there's the technical planning information that people can get through planning agents, but then there's the kind of planning committee element, which is the
political side.
Yeah, what does the planning committee think? How are they treated similar things previously? Are they getting pressures from? Is it going to be difficult? Is it not going to be difficult? What are the kind of things that are going to influence the views and opinions of councillors, both on the committee but as local councillors as well, because local councillors get a voice and get to talk to their colleagues. So it's all that kind of messy stuff that often developers have difficulty understanding or getting some kind of grip of, and that's the interface that I work around, and that's the advice I can offer.
And how can people find you?
I'm on the internet, John Collins Consulting, and put that in the search engine, and I think I should come up.
Great. Well, it's been more than interesting, and I think
I've enjoyed it. It's been great.
even though we come from maybe a slightly different political space, we've managed to remain constructive and debate these things, which is important.
I think so, and I think the other thing is, when you sit down and you talk to people, and most people will agree what the challenges are, and some of the ways forward by way of solutions. I just
in a bipartisan
way. When on the council, and councils are a different thing to national government. All councillors used to agree on about 80 or 90% of stuff. You'd have about 10% disagreement. Maybe local policy impacted by national policy or whatever, just sentiment. But people do, fundamentally, that there is scope for agreement and there is scope for compromise, and I think nationally that's being squeezed out, and it's being squeezed out to the detriment of the good running of the country. And I've been around for bloody ages, obviously, but you kind of feel like there was a baseline of stability up until the early 2000s, and then we seem to be lurching from one thing to another to another, and I can't help thinking that's coincided with an inability to actually listen and to debate and to understand and to compromise and to try and drive things forward in a constructive way. I just think the nature of our politics has got worse, but that's maybe because I've spent the time I have in it, and I'm now outside looking in rather than inside looking out.
Interesting.
There you go.
That has been Mark Homer and John Collins for the Progressive Property YouTube channel.